Welcome back to Chessbox Worldwide. Today I bring you a fantastic game played between IM Alberto Santos Flores from Ecuador and IM Providence Oatlhotse from Botswana during the 45th Olympiad Budapest, Hungary in 2024 between Botswana and Ecuador match on board 1. Alberto Santos Flores is a chess player from Ecuador who holds the title of International Master IM. He has represented Ecuador in chess Olympiads including the 41st Chess Olympiad in 2014, the 45th Chess Olympiad in 2024. His game records show him playing against both titled and untitled players, including a game against former world chess champion Magnus Carlsen in a titled Tuesday event in January 2024. While Providence Oatlhotse is a highly accomplished chess player from Botswana, he holds the title of International Master, which he achieved in 2012 after winning the African Individual Chess Championships. Born in Sorowe, Botswana, he is the highest rated player in Botswana and has won the Botswana Chess Championship an impressive 7 times, and he has represented Botswana in several chess Olympiads since 2004. He qualified and played in the FIDE World Cup 2023, where he was defeated by GM Narayan from India in the first round. Providence is also a chess coach and has founded Play on Purpose Chess Academy to promote chess in local communities and identify new talents. He currently resides in Johannesburg, South Africa, is a true legend in the Botswana chess and continues to be a significant figure in African chess. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the center of African chess. In the white pieces, IM Providence from Botswana opened the game with Knight F3, stopping any E5 ideas with D5 and now G3. This introduces us to the King's Indian attack. White is going to attack the king side while black is going to the queen side. So it's like the reverse King's Indian defense. In this position, we see Knight F6, and after Bishop G2, continuing with the development, we see E6. And in this position, D4 comes to mind, but however, IM Providence just played short castling. And in this position, we see Bishop E7, but however, C5 should have been considered. So we see Bishop E7. And now there are so many ways on how white can continue. Pawn can come to C4. Pawn can come to D3. So many continuations which can be seen. But however, he played pawn D3. So planning to bring the knight sit on D2 and then play E4, attacking on the center. We see C5, and now knight comes to D2. We see knight C6, E4, planning to hit on the center, and now it's going to be bring the rook on E1 and go ahead to advance or either take the pawn depending on the situation at hand. We see short castling, and in this position we see rook E1, the normal move. In this position, black went on with the attack to expand on the queen side, and he played B5, which was a very good move. We see E5, and in this position, we see knight goes back to D7. So that both knights are attacking the pawn, but it's also supported by 2 pieces. So it means another attacker is needed to put more pressure on the pawn which is on E5. So we see knight comes to F1, trying to bring the knight to sit on H2. The knight can sit on G4. Pawn H4 is going to be pushed. Pawn H5. And this is going to be a thunderous attack from the white side. Pawn comes to B4. Should have been considered, but we see pawn A5. And we see H4. Creating a square where knight can sit and then come to G4. B4. Pushing on the pawn. And now knight comes to H2. We see F4. Knight G4. IM Alberto went on to play F3, but however, H5 should have been considered. For example, after pawn H5, we would see knight comes back to H2, and after queen H7, in case of bishop F4, now A3 makes a lot of sense. In case of pawn takes, then now we can also take the pawn with the rook, and now the rook is going to be attacking the pawn, which is on A2. Let's go back. But after knight G4, he played A3, which was a slight inaccuracy, and in this position, pawn takes A3 should have been considered, but however, he played B3. For example, in case of pawn takes A3, then we would see B takes A3, C4 is hitting on the center. Remember, in case of pawn takes, then the center is going to be very weak. We would see knight B4, attacking the pawn which is on D3, and also putting an eye on the pawn which is on D5. C takes D5, E takes D5, knight G5. In case of pawn comes to H7, then E6 is a very powerful move. Knight would go to B8, opening up for the bishop d4 hitting on the center, c takes d4, e6. And in case of pawn takes, then rook takes. In case of bishop takes rook, then now the knight is going to take the rook and then fork the queen and the rook. So bishop takes g5, bishop takes g5, attacking the queen, so there's no time to pick the rook on e6. Queen comes to d7, rook b6, hitting on the knight which is on b4. Knight comes to 6 in defense, sacrificing another knight, knight e5. Then we see knight takes e5, rook takes e5, d3. We see bishop comes to g4, attacking the knight, knight g6, queen takes d3, knight takes f4, rook takes f4, rook takes f4, g takes f4. Bishop comes to b7 and rook b1. This gives white a slight advantage. Let's go back. After f3, he played b3. I am Alberto. Should have tried bishop comes to a6, for example. In case of bishop a6, white has two good moves. White has bishop coming into g5 and bishop coming to h3. All those are good moves. But however, after b3, he played knight d4. IM went on to play bishop comes to f4, but however, knight takes d4 should have been considered. Now we see bishop comes to a6, which was an inaccuracy. Let's go back. In this position, knight b5 should have been considered. We would see queen d2, bishop comes to b7, bishop g5, knight c3, queen comes to f4, pawn moves forward on d4, creating a square where knight can sit and attack the queen on f4. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, after knight g5 to sit, bishop takes g2, king takes g2, and at least this gives black a slight advantage in the position. But however, after bishop f4, he played bishop s6, and now we see knight takes d4, knight takes d4. Remember now, the pawn c2 is the weakness in the game, so all black needs to do is only to pile all these rooks and hit on this weak square. Providence first of all played knight h2, relocating the knight to sit on f3 and then hit on the pawn which is on d4. Rook comes c8, rook c1, defending the pawn, knight b8, and now we see queen comes to g4, king h8. Moving out from the battle of the queen, now we see knight comes to f3, putting an eye on the pawn which is on d4, knight c6, defending the pawn, bishop g5, and after rook comes c7. Now we are planning to get a way of aligning all our pieces to hit on the pawn which is on c2. Bishop comes to f1, queen d7, and now we see king g2, trying to maneuver and then now create all the possibilities to attack. Rook comes c8. As we said, now the two rooks are putting an eye on the pawn which is on c2, which is the weakness. So white has to see a way of defending. Queen comes to f4, and in this position we see bishop f8. Now he's very ready to go ahead and push the pawn so as to trap the bishop. We see h5, creating a running square for the bishop. In this position, h6 should have been played. For example, in case of h6, we would have seen bishop comes to h4, king g8, and after bishop comes to e2, bishop comes on e7, requesting an exchange. Bishop takes, queen takes, and after bishop comes to d1, defending the pawn on c2. Queen comes to f8, maneuvering his queen so as to create space for the knight. Bishop comes to e2, and after f6, knight takes d4. At least this keeps the game very equal. But after h5, IM Alberto played knight a7, opening up for the rook to attack the pawn on c2. Knight a7. You see that the pawn which is on c2 is hanging because it's attacked by two pieces, and also white can still take the pawn on d4, but IM Providence wanted to rip apart the king, so he played h6, trying to open up the game. And after g6, in this position, knight takes d4 should have been considered, but however, he played knight h2, planning to bring the knight on g4 and then sit the knight on f6. For example, in case of knight takes d4, we would see knight b5, and after knight takes b5, bishop takes b5, queen d2, d4, trying to open up lines to attack the king. King comes to g1, king g8, and after rook e2, defending the pawn which is on c2, rook c5, planning to create the Alkine's gun, putting all the three pieces to attack the pawn which is on c2, bishop g2, queen c7. You can see that at least all the three pieces are focusing on to attack the pawn which is on c2, which we call the Alkine's gun. However, in this position, After g6, he played knight h2, giving up the pawn on c2, but planning a big attack on the king side. Then we see rook takes c2, taking the sacrifice pawn, rook takes, and in this position we see knight g4, aiming for the knight to sit on the f6 square. Knight b5 should have been considered, but however I played queen c7, supporting the rook and also putting an eye on the pawn, which is on d5. So in this position we see bishop f6 check, and after king g8 we see bishop g7. Black has two choices, either to take the bishop or to play bishop comes to e2, putting an eye on f6 square. For example, in case of bishop takes g7, we would see h takes g7. After queen d8, then we would see queen h6 and knight f6. Let's go back. That's why after bishop g7, he played bishop e7, and in this position he played queen takes d4. Knight c6, hitting on the queen and also putting an eye on the pawn, which is on d4. See, queen comes to f4, and in this position he played d4, fixing the pawn on d3 so as not give bishop on f1 space to breathe. So in this position, king h3 should have been considered, opening up for the bishop to sit on g2, but however he played king g1, bishop b7. In this position he played bishop g2. In this position, rook takes a2 should have been considered, but he played queen d7, which was an absolute blunder in the game. In this position, IM Providence first of all played bishop comes to f6, and after bishop f8 he played bishop g5, opening up for the knight to sit on f6, checking the king and also winning the queen on the spot. Queen c7, we see knight f6 check, and after king h8, knight sits on e8, hitting on the queen and also putting an eye on the d6 square, and also keeping the f6 square flexible for either pieces to sit, either queen comes to f6 or bishop comes to f6 check. So queen comes in on d7, knight d6, and now all this is hanging and ready for attack. Bishop a8 should have been considered, but however he played king g8, and in this position we see knight takes b7, and after queen takes b7, it's now that the queen has entered the pin of the bishop. Rook comes to c1, rook goes ahead to play c3. In case of rook takes c3, then black would take with either pawn, which creates a passed pawn, which can be winning for him. So queen e4, pinning down the knight against the queen. And remember, in case of rook takes c1, then the bishop will be ready to take back the rook. So in this position, I am Alberto, ladies and gentlemen, sacrificed the knight and played queen b5, putting an eye on the pawn which is on d3 and ready for attack. We see rook takes rook on c3, b takes c3. Now the pawn is ready to go down to be promoted into queen. Queen takes c6, and after queen takes e5, queen is attacking the bishop on g5 and also putting an eye on the check, which is queen check on e1. In this position we see bishop f4 hitting on the queen, and in this position queen c5 should have been considered, but however he played queen e1 check. For example, in case of queen c5, we could give up the pawn, we could play b4, giving up the pawn, and in case of queen takes b4, we play bishop f3, planning to open up the diagonal where the bishop can be very active in the game. We see queen c5, then we see queen takes c5, bishop takes c5, bishop d1, and after king f8, king f1, king comes to e7, bishop g5. At least this gives white a huge advantage. But however, after bishop f4, he played queen e1 check, bishop f1, pawn comes to e5 should have been considered, but however he played f6, trying to play e5 in the future. This gave white a huge advantage. White first of all played queen c8, pinning down the bishop, and now we see that they are very ready to come in with their bishop. In case of pawn e4, this could be losing on the spot because of queen c4 check, and after king h8, queen f7, and black has no way of saving themselves against the mate, which will be coming on to take the bishop either on f8 or queen comes in on e8. Taking the bishop on f8 or queen e8 check would be checkmate. So that's why after queen comes to c8, he tried king f7, And now queen comes in on d7 check. We see king goes back to g8. IM Providence played bishop d6. And in this position, in case of bishop takes bishop on d6, then queen checkmate on g7 would be coming. So c2 was played so as to also prepare a tactic that in case of queen takes f1, then c1 check brings back the queen and the game can still go on. But however, in this position, IM Providence played one last move and IM Alberto resigned the game on the spot. I would like to give you 1 minute to think of that move. Yes, he played queen c8, threatens checkmate in one, at the same time puts an eye on the pawn. For example, in case of queen takes bishop on f1, then we could see king takes queen, and in case of pawn comes to queen on c1, then the queen can still pick the bishop and the game can still go on. So after queen c8, IM Alberto Santos Flores resigned the game on the spot. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching and I wish you the best of luck in your games. Please go ahead, subscribe, like and comment to support the channel.